Hello and welcome to Control the Growing Risk of Hailstorm Damage. This automotive news power training webinar is brought to you by Understory. We're delighted you're with us today for this presentation. My name is Philip Nussel. I'm the online editor at Automotive News, and I'm calling you from my living room in suburban Ann Arbor, Michigan. Before I introduce our speakers today, I wanted to give you all a few navigation tips. First, we encourage you to ask questions at any time. You just type them into the Q&A box on the left side of the webinar window and then hit submit. I'll steer your questions to our speaker toward the end of the session. Also, to enlarge the slides, you just grab the frame with your mouse and you pull it larger. To download the slides, click on the folder icon at the bottom of your console. So today's speakers are Alex Kubicek and Eric Hewitt. Alex is the co-founder and CEO of Understory. He has guided the company through multiple rounds of investment rounds totaling more than $22 million. Eric is the Chief Technology Officer at Understory. He leads the development of cutting-edge weather technologies that power the company's parametric insurance products. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Understory gentlemen and get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. I'm Eric Hewitt, CTO here at Understory, and I'm excited to share with you our cutting-edge technology and how it has helped us learn more about Hale than anybody else has been able to understand in the decades of research prior.
And I'm Alex Kubicek, the co-founder and CEO of Understory, and I want to say thank you to Auto News for hosting us, and thanks for joining us today as we talk about how to control your hailstorm risk with parametric insurance. But before we begin, I'd like to do a quick poll of the audience to really better understand who's in the audience today, and please take a second to respond to this poll to tell us more about your role. Are you a dealer principal or owner, general manager, F&I manager, sales manager? Just to help us better understand how we can tailor the presentation to who's on the line. Great, and for all the dealers that are joining, I'd like to start with a story that you're too familiar with, but before I jump into that, I'll give everyone the polling results, just so you can see all the different peers that are on the call today, so thank you for responding to that. So recently we had a dealership in Texas come to us and tell us something that happened to them that we're hearing more and more in the industry today. Despite going 8 years without a hail claim, Rush was recently faced with a renewal on their dealer open lot insurance that really left them scrambling. Their annual dealer open lot premium jumped by 26%, $78,000 to $98,000. Their aggregate deductible was completely removed, so $100,000 to basically nothing. And while their per car deductible didn't change, their exposure went up by $500,000. They were being asked to write a bigger check for a lot less coverage. So Rush couldn't sleep at night without knowing that he was exposed to $600,000 in damage that could be caused by a small hailstorm. And that's catastrophic for just about any dealer's balance sheet. And this is just one of many dealerships who are facing this new reality. And today, what we're going to be covering is twofold. One, what's causing this hail risk crisis? Why are these increases popping up now? So we'll talk about the impact of climate on hail risk, how we know where this is trending, what parts of the country are most affected, and what dealerships can expect going forward. And secondly, we'll also talk about why these increases are just beginning, why your dealer open lot premium is increasing, and other steps your insurance providers are taking to put more of that hail risk actually on you so that they don't have to worry about it. And so we'll actually talk about how we can actually take control of that. We want to equip you with new tools of thinking about managing this level of risk so you can take back that control, protect that cash flow, and really protect your dealership's balance sheet. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eric, our Chief Technology Officer, to talk a little bit more about the hail risk crisis.
Thanks, Alex. So when we take a look at the average severe storm losses over the last several decades, you can see that it's pretty manageable. Doesn't really go too crazy, and all of this comes from Munich Re. When we start getting into the last couple of decades, we really start to see some huge increases, and there's a lot of factors for this. But what the bottom line is that the risk has become somewhat unmanageable because we can't rely on past results to tell us what's going on in the future. So there's a lot of reasons from the urban areas are growing to there's higher value assets sitting under areas where people are moving and have a lot of hail exposure. But that doesn't explain the big change. And you can see here in 2008, our hail risk in the United States essentially doubled. And this is all severe storm losses, but hail risk makes up about 50 to 60% of all severe losses. Tornadoes make up about the other big chunk. And when you take a look at this, there's just huge spikes in 2011 and 2017, and the whole average has risen, in fact, more than doubled. And as such, it is becoming harder and harder to find ways to protect yourself against severe storm losses, because the way that insurance is priced is based on historical losses. And if those become unusable, then it's very hard to find insurance for it. So when we started the company here in 2012, we started to think about what's going on here. Why is this happening? And we wanted us to learn more about hail and how it was falling. So we invented a weather station called the DOT, and it detects hail. We have had this out in the field for over 5 years now, and it has been on 3 different continents. It has captured over 300 hailstorms and has seen over 60,000 hailstones in nature. It's seen a lot more in the lab, but we've actually caught real hailstorms on those 3 different continents. And it's given us a really huge understanding of what hail looks like when it falls, and more importantly, how hail causes damage when it falls. It's really, really important to not only just think about how big hail is, but how much hail is falling. And that's something that we understand with the DOT. And you can see the sphere on top. That's how we sense hail. Because it's a sphere, we can actually sense where the hail is coming from. So if you have hail coming from the side, hail coming vertically, etc. So we understand what's going on with hail, and we're able to take all of these observations and use them to start looking at the world around us and start looking at what these trends look like in a broader sense. To give you some semblance of how reliable these stations are and how good our hail measurements are, we actually partner with not only the National Weather Service, but also academics institutions and the CASA project specifically in Dallas-Fort Worth. There they have 15 radars around the Metroplex, and they use our stations to calibrate their radar algorithms as to when it's hailing and when it's not. We've seen dozens upon dozens of hailstorms in DFW since we've been there. We have about 150 stations down there alone, and we have helped move hail research forward with this. And our hail data is so accurate that we can be that source of truth for CASA. Not only this, but this is also used by emergency managers in DFW to know when to sound the alert sirens and when to issue different emergency alerts and how to move emergency services around. So we understand hail, and we've seen a lot of it, and we are really good at measuring it. So what does this look like when we think about the U.S. and this problem? So what we did was we mapped the U.S. out into a big grid, and we understood where hail is falling and where we have our stations. And what we did is we applied this to historical weather data. And we went back to 1979 and looked at all of the grid points about every 5 miles or so in the United States. And we essentially just counted every time a grid point saw hail. So for those by year. And then we just plotted this. And what it comes out is that we are seeing hail increase about 12% per decade. So what that means is that every year, over 1% of hail increases in frequency by at least 1%. So we're seeing more and more and more hail. And in another decade or so, we'll have doubled the amount of hail that falls in the U.S. from 1979. So where is this happening? It is happening right where you think that it is. It's in Hale Alley. Kansas itself sees about 2,000 square miles of itself get an additional day of hail a year. Kansas gets plenty of hail, so to have more hail is quite catastrophic for them. If you look at Oklahoma or Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, this whole line has a ton of new hail. But then when you start to look at, well, is it just happening there? Well, no, it's actually growing. So when we plot the areas that have seen hail in the last 20 years that hadn't seen it previously, we start to see a really, really interesting story. Hail is moving into the southwest, into areas like Phoenix. It is moving into the east, into Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Georgia, Alabama, places that never had hail that now have to be protected. And places that used to subsidize the middle of the country are now having hail exposure themselves and having those damages accrue. So we understand exactly what's going on here, and we can start to now help with our understanding of hail. So traditional insurance has typically done, like I said, pricing based off of the last several decades, 30, 40 years. You've all given loss runs whenever you get a new insurance policy. And they're seeing year after year that those losses aren't adding up to what the new year is. And they're panicking. And what's happening is you have a real problem with insurers that don't know how to respond to this type of crisis because they don't understand what the level of increase is, because all they've seen is a very sudden doubling in these policies. So at the end of the day, dealers are left paying more for less coverage. Premiums are rising, aggregates are disappearing, and PDR matrices are being slashed in half. So what's needed is a new way to think about insurance. And I'm going to turn it over to Alex to discuss what exactly this new way of insurance is.
Thanks, Eric. And just because we're based in Wisconsin, we had to throw a little cheese reference in there. But you can think of your traditional insurance products as a piece of Swiss cheese. They're essentially moving those deductibles up. They are taking away the aggregate, and they're adding special things that basically continue to remove that hail risk from the insurer and basically put all that exposure on you. So really relying on that traditional insurance as a single point solution, which used to be a really great solution for many, many decades, is no longer working. 5-10 years ago, you might have been able to actually make money off a hailstorm, and now we're seeing the rising hail risk come in and how those traditional insurers are responding, and it's not great. While traditional insurance is still essential for protecting your dealership from a variety of risks, it's really no longer enough. So it's time to evolve past the single traditional type of understanding insurance and moving into something that can actually allow for a diversified approach. And so I want to introduce something today called parametric insurance. This is a concept very similar to something you're all familiar with, life insurance. So once someone dies, the life insurance payment is made. So parametric insurance is once an event happens, once a parameter is met, the payment is made as quickly as the banking system allows for it. It's simple and it's transparent. And this can be any parameter. This could be hail, flooding, wind, lightning, etc. It could even go beyond weather and it's something completely different. But really it is an event that's defined in the insurance contract that essentially pays out once that's met. And so essentially what that does is it removes the need for adjusters in the dealership case tying up your service bays or you actually haggling payment terms with your insurance provider when you're trying to actually get things repaired quickly. And there's a few benefits to actually supplementing your traditional insurance with this parametric insurance. By incorporating parametric insurance into the hail risk management approach, you actually have the ability to have a faster and easier recovery because it's going to produce payment much faster without tying up those service bays that I mentioned before. If you're facing a severe increase in your aggregate deductible or it's been dropped altogether, the parametric insurance can actually be used to close that the exposure gap. So if your deductible went from $1,500 per car to $2,500 per car, that's a really good opportunity to plug in parametric insurance to make sure that you're covered for all of those minor storms. And if you've decided that with these rising deductibles that you're actually going to self-insure, you're going to put money aside in a slush fund to deploy it whenever that large hail risk happens, then you're actually tying up capital that you can use for a lot of different other things. And so by purchasing parametric insurance, it really allows you to redeploy that frozen capital. And so just to talk a little bit about that first point, parametric insurance actually allows for a much simpler process. So what I'm showing here is essentially, a process a lot of you know really well, unfortunately, but a storm occurs, you have to call the insurance company, an adjuster visits. Sometimes you might have multiple policies, so then you have maybe, we've actually heard sometimes 3 different adjusters in those service bays, either looking at every single car that you have or taking a sample of those cars. And then they produce essentially an assessment, and then they eventually pay it. And so this process can take anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks, essentially making you pay for anything that you're doing in the meantime directly out of pocket. So if you're performing PDR repairs to the cars, or if you're actually launching a hail sale, you have to do that all out of pocket. With parametric insurance, the storm occurs, that event is noticed, and the payment is processed as fast as those banking systems allow. So it really allows you to have that cash on hand to actually pay down that traditional deductible, make repairs to your vehicles, to your property, use that to cover any losses from business interruption, and actually cover that gap. And that's the next point that we're making is that, essentially by looking at your traditional dealer open lot policy, there is a large amount, an increasingly large amount of how much money that you have to put out, how much you have to put out per car with those aggregates disappearing, those deductibles increasing. That is something that's a burden that you actually have to bear. With the diversified approach, you can actually close that gap with a parametric area so that you're actually completely protected against those smaller hailstorms that might not trigger that dealer open lot policy and allow for you to actually be whole at the end of the day. And by having this parametric policy, you don't have any restrictions on where that cash can go. Like I mentioned before, it can be used to repair cars, it can be used for business interruption, marketing expenses for a hail sale. The possibilities are really endless in what you can do with that cash. Now, when you're thinking about looking at parametric products, you're actually going to hear this a lot more in the marketplace because this is a new, exciting technology. The advances in technology, like Eric was describing before, really allow for really interesting products to be made around that. But you have to be very careful about how you're selecting those parametric products. So one, assessing your current exposure. So one of the main things that we have our clients do is they look at how many cars they have and multiply it by their per car deductible. That helps us understand what level of gap coverage is right for them. And if you still have a total aggregate deductible, you can utilize that as well. if you still have one, if you're one of the lucky few that still have one of those aggregates. The other thing that you want to look at in your dealer open lot policy is if there's any kind of PDR discounts or payouts. We've seen areas where your deductible is $1,500 per car, but then you have a PDR discount of 30 or 40%, effectively making that deductible actually $2,500 instead of $1,500. And when you're looking at that, think about when it typically hails at your dealership when your last hail event occurred, and so are you comfortable with this level of exposure? Are you worried that you're going to have a significant amount of capital that could impact your bottom line at any time, especially right now we're in the middle of hail season? Is that something that you're worried about? Or when you're thinking about self-insuring, is there a better way for me to actually use this capital? The other pieces is just really understanding those different parametric policies. So there's a lot of different flavors of how these parametric hail policies can be written. So you have to be really careful and actually read the policy in it very, very closely to understand, one, that claims process. So some of these parametric products that are out there are essentially really just the traditional insurance product, but just with some technology embedded. They require a proof of loss from you before even issuing a payment, and your parametric product should be built for your needs, and the loss should really be known ahead of time by the damage actually covered by that parametric trigger. And that ultimately allows you to move into an immediate settlement and a fast payout that I described earlier. The other piece is that it should be completely transparent. So some of these parametric products require the insurance company approves the parameter or the result of the event before that actually goes to you. You should be able to see the event outcome instantly right after that damaging event occurs, and it should be at the exact same time that your insurance company sees it. And lastly, the really big point that we want to make is that while there's all this really great technology out there, some of it might not be actually accurate around describing how much damage is actually occurring. The technology should be backed by research, have trusted partners. You have to essentially trust that at the end of the day, when this product triggers, that it will measure the event correctly and properly capture how much damage you have. So the product should also be based on extensive damage testing. How well does this event or this parameter describe the damage or the loss I'm going to have at the end of the day? If you're not careful, some of these parametric policies could fall short on making you whole. So just returning at the end of the day to rush, we've seen that the risk of hailstorms are not what they used to be, and unfortunately, as you saw from the research that we performed at Understory, we're really seeing the beginning of this trend. So unfortunately, we're going to see these traditional insurance costs continue to follow suit. They will continue to raise premiums and deductibles, remove aggregates, and carve out areas of the policy that leave you exposed. But with this diversified approach, by using parametric insurance to fill in those gaps, you're not entirely at the mercy of Mother Nature. You can take back control of that hail risk. Rush is a great example of this. After losing their aggregate deductible, they were facing a catastrophic hail exposure in the event of a hailstorm to the tune of $600,000. It made Rob essentially unable to sleep at night just because he knew at some point, even though he was in kind of a lower risk area in the south of Texas, that if that event happened, he'd be in a really bad spot. So what they ended up doing is incorporating parametric insurance into their risk management approach, and they were able to close that exposure gap by hundreds of thousands of dollars, getting them to a much more reasonable cash outlay in the event of the storm. So just talking a little bit about Understory. Understory is the first company to bring parametric insurance to the dealership market. We launched this product in 2019. It's now available in 17 states, and it's growing. And we'd really love to work with you to assess your dealer open lot hail exposure together and find options where we can essentially make sure that you're being completely protected and how parametric can actually fill in those gaps. You can check out our website at understoryweather.com to get in touch, and we'll be happy to provide a quote. So thanks, everyone, for your attention today. and we'll move into the Q&A section where Eric and I will answer any questions.
Okay, thanks for the great information. Audience, we have plenty of time for you. Please, the floor is now open for questions. Gentlemen, I'm going to just jump in here with a quick question of my own. Can you talk a little bit more about the geographical aspects of this? And you're available in 17 states. Can you talk a little bit more about areas that are the most at risk, where you think this product has the best applicability?
Yeah, Eric, can you talk about some of the areas that are growing in hail risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the traditional hail areas like Kansas and Oklahoma and Colorado, even the north part of Texas, are really seeing big increases in hail frequency. And we're active in all those states, as well as a bunch others, and essentially across the U.S. But we really focus on sort of the middle of the country, and a lot of the bigger hail is falling in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Ohio is starting to see a lot of really big hail as well. And so Texas saw 6-inch hail last week, and San Antonio got hit with 2-inch hail last night. So it's really up and down the Great Plains.
All right. Here's a really good question. Is this a supplement to or a replacement for traditional open lot coverage?
Yeah, so this is a supplement to traditional open lot coverage. As you are looking at your dealer open lot exposure, you can utilize parametric to basically fill in that gap where either the deductible is rising to a point where it's leaving you too exposed, or where those aggregates are being completely removed. So by combining a parametric product with your dealer open lot, you can actually be completely covered in the event that any storm hits, minor or major.
All right. Talk a little bit more about what the weather people are telling you. I almost feel like we're on the Weather Channel here. Do you foresee the hail risk continuing to rise on the same trajectory, and the cost to continue to rise along with it? What else are you advising your clients about this kind of thing?
Yeah, so we absolutely expect hail to continue to rise. We're doing a lot of work to take into account the changing weather patterns and how that looks. And as things get warmer, that means more water going up to then fall to the ground as ice. And that will not change in the coming decades here. So we will continue to see more and more hail. As such, we are really focused on being able to provide products that can protect our customers from this increased risk of damage.
All right, here's another geographical question. But do you cover Nebraska and Iowa as part of the 17 states? And I'll just add Canada, because we often have audience members from Canada here, and wondering, and we usually get questions about whether something is applicable to Canada.
Yeah, Nebraska and Iowa are covered as part of the 17 states. You can take a look at our website at understoryweather.com to see all the 17 states that we do cover. But we are open to potentially writing policies in states that aren't part of those 17. So if you're outside of those states, please drop us a note, and we can see if we can provide something that can cover your exposure. And then your second question on Canada is that while we're not currently in Canada, that is something on our roadmap, because we do know that, especially in the Calgary area, that hail it's tricky.
Absolutely. Does the dealership have to have someone come out and assess the hail damage to file a claim, or does the system somehow handle validating a hail claim scenario? Maybe get us a little more detail on how that works?
Yeah, so after you purchase a parametric policy, a weather station is installed on the property. It covers a range of about a quarter-mile radius, so that covers most size lots in the U.S. And essentially, when the weather sensor detects hail, it actually uses that to pay out. So you'll get an email that says, "We detected hail," and it has met the threshold, the parameter to actually pay out, and to expect payment in 5 to 10 days.
Which led to this, another question that we had about the range of the weather sensors. How do they work? Are they solar powered, or tell us a little bit more about the weather sensors, along with more about how the range works.
Yeah, so they're solar powered. They just sit up on a roof. They are they don't need to be drilled into the roof. They just are held there with concrete blocks. So they're rated up through an F1 tornado. So if you get hit with a tornado, the station will go. But essentially it measures atmospheric force. So like I said, when the hail is hitting the station, we were able to understand exactly where the hail came from, what it looked like as it hit the station, and how big it was, and how much energy and damageability it actually had going into that. And as such, we then take a look at, okay, what does this hailstorm look like from all of the other hailstorms that we've sort of seen, and so we can understand exactly what type of hail is falling in that quarter-mile radius.
All right. Can you talk a little bit more about how the product is rated and priced?
Yeah. Alex, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we're partnered with a Mitsui Sumitomo as well as MSI Guaranteed Whether to build these products. Those groups are backed by a reinsurer called Hanover Re, and that's how we actually produce these parametric products to dealerships. So you can purchase the products through us, but we don't actually carry any of the risk. It all goes with our insurance partners. The pricing is actually based off the hail research that Eric just showed earlier in the presentation. So I'll hand it over to you, Eric, to talk a little bit about the pricing.
Yeah, so like I said before, we were able to understand the risk of hail and the frequency of hail, but what I didn't show here is we're able to understand the sizes as well, and as such, we price based on your exact risk at your location. So we built the product with the triggers based on vulnerability testing. We shot car hoods with a hail gun with different size hail, and we understood where damage started and crossed that with PDR matrices to see, okay, what's damage going to cost dealers, and then we set those triggers, and then based on those triggers we can price based on the actual risk that each dealership has. So your risk in Oklahoma will be much different than your risk in Ohio, for example.
All right. Can you talk a little bit more about why it is important to have ground level hail data versus radar for a parametric policy?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started the company, we were actually looking at what type of weather information was out there in the world. So, everyone's familiar with cursing the local meteorologist for getting the forecast wrong, or what happened with the weather and just not getting that 100% right. And a lot of that's due to the tools that we currently have and how we measure weather. So when you're cursing the meteorologist, a lot of it's just the inadequacy of radar that's out there. So radar is scanning the sky, and what's happening in the sky isn't always the same as what's happening on the ground. So it's really important to have essentially the capability to measure what's happening directly on the ground. So like with the dot weather station, as Eric was describing it, actually having the ability to know what that force of the hail is, how much damage that's actually causing at your exact dealership is really important, so that at the end of the day, when the parametric insurance is triggered, that you are being made completely whole, and that the damage to your lot is actually being understood by the sensor by actually correlating basically taking the hail size, understanding how many dents are going to be happening at your lot, and then turning that into a payout.
All right. Here's a good question from the audience. And by the way, audience, we still have plenty of time. We should be able to get to most, if not all, of your questions. So feel free to continue asking. We've had a number of really good questions here, so keep them coming. Do you have any information if the insurance itself, without conventional insurance, would cover the cost of PDR repairs?
We certainly do. So, like I mentioned, we did the vulnerability testing, and we're actually expanding it to more and more makes and models, as many cars as we can get our hands on. So we're able to understand exactly what size hail causes certain damage. So, for example, a quarter-sized dent is actually caused by about 1.75 inch hail. So when we start to take a look at these things, we can then, since we know every single hailstone that hits during a hailstorm, we can then also back that into, okay, how many dents are going to be on a lot. And as such, we've crossed that with the PDR matrices and started to really understand exactly what types of damage go along with it. In a lot of these cases, there's blanket deals that PDR companies provide for hail repair after large hailstorms. But we've also validated that with some PDR companies to understand, okay, what is this damage reasonable for these different storms that we've witnessed, and we are continuing to build that, and we're happy to talk with you about how sort of our product lines up with that for your inventory.
All right. The gentleman, forgive me for being a journalist here, but tell us more about your story. About where did Understory? How did it happen? Where did you guys get this product idea from? It seems like a very, I've covered insurance a good chunk of my career as a journalist, so there's always the old saying is that you can insure anything, but this is a really innovative product. Tell us how you came up with the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So we founded the company about 8 years ago, and essentially how I came up with the idea is that I actually went and did Hurricane Katrina cleanup when I was going through my master's in atmospheric science. And so when I understood, essentially just how much we didn't understand about weather by actually going and doing that cleanup in New Orleans and just seeing the power of storms and just how we weren't really prepared for it, made us understand that we really needed to change the way weather was measured. And so one of the first areas where we applied that new type of technology to really understand how weather is measured, we started working with different industries to see how we can help them. And so insurance was one of the biggest things there because, essentially you're seeing fraud in many other areas, so specifically around homeowners, just because of the inadequacy of the data that's already out there. So we started working with different insurance companies to help streamline their claims processing. But we found at the end of the day that it's actually better to take this technology because we learned that it was just so accurate by having it on 3 separate continents for about the past 5 years. gathering more storm information than any other company out there, allowed us to understand that we could actually just turn this directly into an insurance product. And so if it wasn't apparent by the presentation before, we're effectively a bunch of weather nerds that are trying to fix insurance.
That's a very interesting story. I would have guessed you guys were in the insurance business first. Here's a good question. If my dealership stores vehicles at different lots across a wider geography, and this happens a lot with the big auto dealer, with the groups, these big family-owned groups of dealers, would we need to have separate policies for each location, or do you do one corporate-wide policy that covers multiple locations?
So the way the policy is structured could go either way on that, but for multiple locations, and we've actually had a few of our customers have these storage lots, is we actually install another weather sensor at those lots so that those payouts occur specifically for the lot. So maybe if your storage lot is 2 miles away from your dealership, the hail that you're experiencing 2 miles away might be completely different from the hail that you're experiencing at the actual dealership location. So it's really important to have those ground measurements at each location so that those locations are having the event tracked appropriately so that you can be made whole at the end of the day. Great.
Are there options to cover various portions of existing open deductibles, like say 50%, 75%, 100% of an existing per unit deductible? Is that an option?
Yeah, so when we take a look, if you go to our website and ask for a quote or reach out to us, those are one of the many factors that we look at when providing you with a variety of options of how you can use this to cover that gap. So you don't have to cover 100% of the gap. You can cover part of the gap, and depending on which part of the gap you'd like to cover, we can help you with that too. Do you want to cover the first $500 or the second $500? As Eric talked about previously, that we've done a lot of research around where the hail actually damages the cars. So it allows us to basically cover you exactly where you want to be on that scale.
All right. Another good question here from the audience. I see several storms every year, and the handling of the insurance adjuster and the PDR companies. Usually there is a lot of complaints from the dealer side. Since you started in 2019, what would be the most important added value that dealers confirmed?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of different value from many different companies. Essentially, some dealers are excited about having that fast payment so they can utilize that to either use that for PDR repair or actually use that to move cars on or off the lot. And some of our dealerships actually have taken that cash to launch hail sales, where they just say, I'm not going to repair these vehicles, I'm just going to move them at a discount, but actually utilize this cash to cover the difference or the sale price that I'm going to be using for these vehicles. So really it's up to the dealership on how they want to utilize that cash to get back on their feet faster. When working with PDR companies, we are exploring different ways where we can help connect you so that those woes can be a little bit less problematic, but we're happy to help in any way that we can around that.
Well, gentlemen, before we wrap up, is there anything else that we're that we need to know that the typical errors some of your potential clients make when they think about this? What's the first thing? What is the most important thing that we need to tell them when they consider this kind of coverage?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that we talk to first is that a lot of people are unsure of their actual hail exposure. Like Erica was showing, a lot of the science outside of Understory around hail risk isn't well known, and so that's why the market is incredibly volatile right now. You may talk to, or your broker may talk to one carrier that can provide you with a very low deductible but a higher price. Another carrier may look like it has a low deductible, but then they install those PBR discounts that cause a lot of those issues, with your policy. And so really it's just helping our customers better wrap their head around this hail exposure. What am I looking at? How often is it going to hail? How can I make sure that I can utilize this parametric policy to really cover my gap? And really, am I better off self-insuring? And most times, it's actually much more cost-effective and provides a much better amount of cash flow to actually purchase the parametric insurance versus self-insuring. But we're really happy to help with, consulting with actually helping you pick the best option for your dealership.
And just in case somebody missed it, who's the insurance carrier that you're listing that you work with, or is it a reinsurance? I couldn't. If you could remind us how that worked.
Yeah. So the insurance company is MSI Guaranteed Whether. They list the name Vortex Insurance on the actual policy paper, so that you can look them up at MSI Guaranteed Whether if you want to take a look at their rating, as well as who they work with at Hanover Re, which is a reinsurance company. So MSI Guaranteed Whether is a company that's based in Kansas City. They've actually been in the parametric space for about 20 years, and they have a lot of experience understanding how to structure parametric policies in a way that makes sure that, for a lot of these new exposures that are opening up, that, people at the end of the day, they can be made completely whole.
Terrific. Well, and once again, your website is understoryweather.com. We had a question come in just about the website. So yeah, that's understoryweather.com. And with that, that brings us to the end of this webinar. Thanks to today's audience for the questions. If you asked a question that we didn't get a chance to answer, Understory will follow up with you by email. If you learned something from this session, please tell your peers about it. The recording will be available in about an hour, and you'll find it at autonews.com/powertraining. When the webinar ends, a survey will pop up on your screen. Your feedback helps us create future webinars that are even more beneficial to you. So thanks again to Alex, Eric, and Understory for bringing us this excellent, innovative presentation, and to you for joining us. On behalf of everybody at Automotive News, have a great rest of your day.